So welcome everybody to our second session of releasing our spiritual Hametz through the six pathways. And this is our, as I just said, this is our second session together. And for anybody listening, we've gone through our introductions. And I'd just like to open the floor for a little bit of feedback or questions that anybody may have, either from what we talked about last week or from your own reading experience or writing experience. Have at it. Does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make? Barbie.
I have no question, but I have a comment, and it makes more sense from what you said last week after having gotten the book in my physical hands
Oh,
and
good.
reading it. I'm loving it. I told you that.
Thank
Um,
you.
I have not started journaling. I'm not big on journaling, but I think this is something I'm going to have to learn to do.
Well, you don't have to. You have freedom and choice.
Well,
But
I may choose to do it.
okay, good. I think it is helpful. Even if you just jot down notes at the back of the book, there are worksheets that, as I said, you're free to copy if you think you want to, use them multiple times, or there's just some lined pages purposely so that if you don't want to, dedicate a whole notebook, there are exercises that you'll see that it will be helpful to write down.
Thank
It's
you.
also helpful in keeping a record from one period of time to the next, whether it's from Pesach to Rosh Hashanah or Pesach this year to Pesach next year, to say, well, where was I last year? What was I thinking 6 months ago? And how have I grown or changed? Because otherwise we tend to forget it. We don't realize that we're making changes, but if we keep a record of it, then we're like, oh, I didn't realize I was thinking like that before. And we can see that we have grown. There was another reason I was thinking of that escapes me right now, but if I think of it, I'll just blurt it out.
So
Anything
the
else?
whole person wheel, the idea
Yes.
that it's a wheel. I mean, is that just kind of arbitrary? There isn't any real significance. Like I'm looking at page 20, and you got physical is next to that slice of the pie is next to mental is next to emotional. Is it just random? It doesn't, and then they're on the outside of the drawing. It looks like they're arrows moving around. I mean, is that suggesting that there is some kind of movement through these things that is more than would be achieved if we just displayed them in a graph, let's say, or a list?
Yeah, yes, it is intentional. First of all, it isn't my design. It's a compilation of other designs. But the circular is that there's constant movement, and the arrows trying to go both ways. They aren't really, but that you can go any way you want around the circle. You can cut through the circle. You can go in any direction you want. You can start anywhere you want. But circular is that it's moving and that it is integrated and connected. As I said last week, I choose to start with the more visible and the physical because I think that's easier. Again, just to tie it into the Hametz, when we remove physical leaven and Hametz from our homes, we see that physically. It's not quite as easy to say, oh, I recognize that I'm having a negative thought and I need to release that negative thought. I mean, we will get to that maybe today. But for most people, it's been my experience that it's easier to start with something tangible that we can feel, taste, smell, see, use our senses.
Kathy, can I bring something up? It's
Yeah,
Janie.
please.
Okay. So it just turns out I'm participating in Daf Yomi in the daily reading of a page of Talmud, and just had a page. Well, I had never known there was a second chance to do Passover on the 14th of ER. And one of the reasons given is if you're too far away, and then the rabbis, of course, argue over what too far away means.
Mhm.
But one of the discussions was if you have too much spiritual hametz, I'm not sure it was said in those words, those would be your words, you can postpone the observance of Pesach for a month to the second Pesach, which I never knew until reading the Talmud. I never knew that existed. So I just thought I would share that because it's apropos of the class.
Absolutely. And I knew there was a second Pesach, and I've known the physical distance reasoning, but no, I never have heard that explanation too. That is very
well. It was in the discussion
somewhere, huh?
What?
There's always a loophole with our tradition.
I've heard that it was because of the original holiday of Passover was largely funded by the greeting card industry, and so the second Passover was just they insisted on it, frankly.
They hadn't sold enough cards yet?
Yes, that's correct.
Good one, Eli. Love it.
Thank you, Eli.
You do the research as I have, and you'll find this to be correct.
Well, yes, Mimi?
Yeah, in thinking of Hametz, getting rid of the Hametz, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Hametz is usually what I say, but I don't know. And
okay, Hametz. And I'm thinking of all the physical trouble I've had this year, how challenging this year is. How am I going to get from getting rid of the physical Hametz to the spiritual part? Is what I've been thinking about over the past week, really, because it's not an easy leap. It's not a just, well, now I can just crawl right along that space at all, because it's been such a challenge, and I have worked as hard as I know how to work on it. So it'll be interesting to see where my journey takes me and how to get to the spiritual.
Thank you for sharing that, and I hope I hope you'll continue to share how you do get from feeling so burdened physically to being able to get into spiritual space.
Yeah. Because I think the spirituality will be freeing. I think it will be very freeing if I can get there, or as I get there, or the journey to get there. Yeah. I think
yes, that's not only an excellent point.
All these weren't.
Hi,
sorry.
That's okay. Did you want to say something, Mike?
I'm just trying to get so Ellen can see you.
Oh. Okay, well, Josh is better at the technical than I am. So keep working on it, and maybe Josh can answer.
Can you mute us so that we don't interfere?
Sure, that's fine.
You're doing that, Josh? Thank you.
You may need to just pull up the Zoom screen to see that window.
So what you just said, and you know, you can attest, I did not prompt you. One of my tasks that I wrote down for myself today, and I don't know that I'll fully accomplish it or not, maybe with all of us working together, we will, because I think it's really the crux of what we're talking about here, is how do we move from the physical into the spiritual? And how do we further that connection?
Yes.
And so I have a few steps that I'll be introducing, but I think that's a very, very valid challenge, and a challenge for all of us, not only someone who's actually in pain, but all of us have physical bodies that can weigh us down and beleaguer us and get in the way of our wanting to be joyful or spiritual. Though we certainly can recognize people who've been confined to wheelchairs or have ALS and yet can have a very active mental, emotional, spiritual life. But it's a challenge. I mean, a lot of chess players, people who are masters at sitting, have to conquer all their physical feelings that would interfere with their meditation, with their chess game, with their concentration, because that's our nature. We are physical, spiritual beings. Well, thank you.
Yeah, sure, sure. No, but I was thinking in my situation, since it's my body, I don't want to turn against my body. I've always liked my body,
Of
right?
course.
And so it's a very tricky balance to get from toxins, to get rid of the toxins, and to get to a healthy spiritual place.
I hope we all can experience that and help you with that.
Okay.
Does anyone else have comments, questions, anything? Did anyone try any of the physical writing or physical movement exercises? You don't have to share. I know you all did it and you just don't want to talk about it. Well, I continue to encourage you to do it. But along the lines that I was just saying, I just want to repeat, if somebody's watching this for our own refreshment, and for anyone watching who maybe didn't see last week or doesn't remember, as we talk about Pesach, what the scholars that I've been studying and the rabbis I've been studying keep reminding us that Pesach is the core experience of the Jewish people. It is what took us from generational family saga in the Bible into the singular experience of being redeemed by God and taken out of slavery and becoming a singular people, the Jewish people, who are told you have choices and you need to choose freedom, choose servitude to God only. And then it becomes, and to our one God, it becomes our mission to figure out, what is that? What does that mean? Does anyone have any further thoughts? I know last week Janie so aptly reminded us that freedom is about choice. And I think that's such an important principle, because that is what is going to show up over and over and over. When you are a slave, you don't have a choice of where you live, how you live, where you sit, where you move, how you move, what you do, what you think, what you eat. And so I want to continue to explore, how are we, as we come to our Seder tables and start reading our Haggadahs, how are we going to experience this year and this Pesach as we are slaves in Egypt and physically moving from slavery to liberation?
But that's part of what I'm saying. I've been a slave to my body, so I'm getting freedom. Today is a great day today. I feel good. I felt good for the past a small period of time, which is exciting, but that's basically what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, you're feeling I'm trying to think who it was. I think Jan last week asked, are all the wedges in the pie, are they always of equal size?
No.
And absolutely not. I think you're feeling very much burdened by the
Oh,
physical.
I have been, yeah, for 2 years, and you all know that, and that's why
Yeah.
I'm talking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And some
Better.
people,
It's better than it's been, but it's better. So don't.
that's wonderful.
That needs to
That's
be clear,
wonderful.
too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But someone else may feel very beleaguered by thoughts and cognitive oppression, that they can't stop thinking something, or they can't stop beating up on themselves. And that's what I want to do right now is, if people, if you have a copy of the book, I want to have us different people read, and then I was going to read something else from Shlomo Riskin, but if you would turn to, let me just see where I had it marked off. Page 17. because I want to talk about the physical Hametz and then how we go from the physical to the spiritual. Actually, page 16. Would somebody be willing to start with the second paragraph down? We can further define our homes.
I can do it.
Okay, thanks.
I'll unmute.
Yes, if you're going to read, then please unmute yourself.
We can further define our homes to include our physical and spiritual homes. Hametz is in our foods and is also within us. Some scholars suggest Hametz also symbolizes a puffiness of self, an inflated personality and egocentricity that threatens to eclipse the essential personality of the individual. Let us look at the ways in which Hametz was defined by biblical scholars. In rabbinic literature, leaven is often used as a metaphor for the evil inclination or yetzer hara. Rabbi Kerry Elitsky cites Rabbi Arthur Waskow, who called this kind of Hametz the swollen sourness in our lives that lurks menacingly in the recesses of the soul.
And then just read that next paragraph. We'll stop.
After this next paragraph?
Right, read the quote there.
Okay. Hametz is also the baggage we carry from broken promises, failed relationships, and personal disappointments that weigh heavily on us. It is the refuse of daily living, the residual stuff that emerges from poor decisions, mistakes in judgment, and mortal failure.
Thank you. So there we're taking it, and I wanted to, this is Rabbi Elitsky's book, Preparing Your Heart for Passover. It's a small book. The first half talks a lot about what we're talking about here, and the second half takes parts of the Seder and relates it to what he's referred to earlier. And I really, really recommend this book if you're interested in this type of reading and research. And you'll see that's why he's heavily quoted in the first part of what I wrote, because I think he does an excellent job of going beyond the physical leaven pieces of bread or barley or beans, unless you're Sephardic, that we're getting out of the house, to saying, yes, our rabbis talked about that. And right now, this time of year, you're probably getting all kinds of notices from your own synagogue or from the rabbinic assembly of, here's how you prepare your kitchen and your home for Passover, and here's how you kosher this appliance, and here's what you need to get out of the house. And it's very, very heavily, the material out there in our day and age, not always at all, but in our day and age, the material out there has been very heavily weighted towards the leavened substances. So I just, in addition to that, I want to read something from, this is also an excellent book. The guy copied my title, I don't know why, but it is called In Every Generation, A Treasury of Inspiration for Passover and the Seder, and it's edited by Sidney Greenberg and Pamela Roth. Now, these both books that I just cited are in the list at the back of my book, so you don't have to write it down. It's there. But there's an essay. What this book is very short essays all through the book by different scholars, rabbis, noted people, about different aspects of Pesach. And so Shlomo Riskin wrote one called Four More Questions, where I thought he did a good job of defining what he talks about Egypt as the narrow straits of our existence, which Mitzrayim, we did talk about that a little last week. But he says, even though slavery has officially been banished in most of the world, we can become slaves in other ways. Our bodies can become enslaved to addictions of food, drink, or drugs. Our minds can be addicted to games of chance, to television. Of course, when he wrote this, there weren't cell phones or maybe even computers. I'm not sure when he wrote this, but I would add cell phones and computers in there. And then this is where I was very intrigued by the mental aspect, or to a fixed way of looking at ourselves, which cannot get past events that took place 10, 20, or 40 years ago. So we're talking a little bit about mental freedom today. That's my hope, that we talked a lot more about the physical. We'll do more about the physical, but also mental parts of our personality and cognitive. So we can become addicted to a fixed way of looking at ourselves, which cannot get past events that took place 10, 20, or 40 years ago. If someone constantly dwells on childhood traumas, angry that his parents deprived him of love or smothered him with too much affection, then his mind is enslaved to the past. No matter how bitter the trauma, the inability to go on with life, to assume proper commitments and obligations and see them through to the end is the expression of an enslaved mentality. So when I read that, partly as a former clinical therapist, I was impressed how sometimes when I would work with people, they wanted to spend the whole time talking about what happened, what happened, what happened, what happened. And we have to move from what happened then, which we may have had no control or power over, to where we are now. And yes, there's a time and a purpose for discussing what used to happen and why I'm the way I am and how this happened and how I was treated. But then we also have to come to grips with today, that we're an adult and we're a free adult, and we no longer have to stay in the slavery of past beliefs about ourselves. As difficult as it may be, we can learn new ways of thinking about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves. And that comes under that rubric also, that a lot of people, I wouldn't necessarily say this group, but there are people who don't have the understanding that we're always talking to ourselves. We're always saying things to ourselves. And it's very important to listen to that, and even to write down what am I saying to myself, because what we say to ourselves is where we derive our beliefs about ourselves. And we have thoughts, and then they become beliefs, and they become automatic, and we define ourselves, and we may not even realize that we're defining ourselves and limiting ourselves by those thoughts. Anybody have any comments on that? No? Okay. So where we talked about last week, our physical part on my little drawing and wheel, which you also do have in your book on page 20. And again, if you want to look at it bigger, it's in the appendix part, the first drawing in the appendix. So we talked about what we've just said is a little easier to identify. Physical, we understand that physical, we may be addicted to certain foods. We may be not able to move. We may feel heaviness or tightness or pain in our bodies. And then we're all dealing with stress. The only time we don't have stress is after we're dead. And then we have our physical environment, and what are the limits of that environment, and how can we help ourselves feel free through that. But then we go, if you turn to page 23, to talking about our mental what are we going to say fits into that category that I was just reading from Rabbi Riskin, but some other things that, how are we going to become mentally free? What does mental enslavement look like? Anyone want to take that one on?
You're so worried about how people think about you that you're not living your true life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's overpowering. It can be overpowering.
Right. So that you have the belief that you have to please other people, or you have to fit their concepts of who you should be and how you should behave, that you're not able to make free choices about that. And that's a major one for most of us. And again, I'm going to use that model also of a continuum. Only I want to say something more about it. And that is, last week when I talked about a continuum, I talked about going from 0 to 10, that 0 being the lowest or the most negative, and 10 being the most positive. But I also wanted to add to that another drawing of a continuum, where actually we're not trying to go from 0 to 10, we're trying to go to balance, 5, because any one of these pie shapes it's a double-edged sword. It can be helpful or it can be hurtful. And for instance, again, going back to the physical, movement, exercise, stretching, being comfortable in your body is very, very important. Taken to an extreme, you have someone who's addicted to exercise, who doesn't feel they can, that they deserve to start their day or have a life unless they've exercised an hour every morning. The opposite extreme, someone who doesn't move at all by choice. I'm not talking about physical disabilities here, but so on each of these, physical, mental, emotional, each of these, we're not striving to get from one extreme to the other. And I would say most of us are not at one extreme or the other, but we might be striving to get from a 3 to a 4, or down from a 7 to a 6 or a 5. And one of the reasons I like workshops where I'm present physically, it's a little easier for me because I usually have charts and I can draw things and explain things more. So it's a challenge on Zoom, and certainly ask me to clarify again and again if you need. I'll do the best I can. Because I'm not good at the screen sharing technicalities. I couldn't make charts and put them up, and just can't do it. My limitation. But in the middle of this, I added this week, when I had said that's the integral soul part of ourselves, what I also put that goes across the board is choice. Choice is the unifying principle in all of these, that we do have the ability to intervene in the area of choice. But before we can do that, we have to be aware of what it is. We can't clear the Hametz out of our minds if we don't know what the Hametz is. We don't know, what the hell is she talking about? I know Hametz, it's bread and it's pasta and it's leaven, but I don't get what that has to do with my mind. And that's why I, again, would say the first chapter of my book, and where I expounded so much on Rabbi Elitsky's thinking, I really think he does an excellent job of explaining what the Hametz of our minds is. So I refer you to that. So will someone, any question over what I just said?
I wanted to say something.
Please, thank you.
And I should have before. It was the mental part. I want to say that in my experience, when you have something that's, quotes, plaguing you internally, your self-talk, it's not okay to dispute it mentally, to just say it over and over in your mind and talk to yourself. You have to write it down. You have to bring it to the light of day so that you see it, and then work on disputing it. It isn't just as simple as saying, well, I shouldn't be feeling that way. Why am I feeling that way? In order to get over it, you need to dispute it. Well, wait a minute. Who told me this is true? What do I think is true? So I was just going to say, it's an exercise. It's really an exercise to dispute the thoughts that keep plaguing one.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up, Janie. One of the things I'm hoping to do this coming year is to develop a broader workbook. But if you, okay, I guess I don't have that worksheet in here. Okay, but if you look on page 57, there is some help in identifying the event, the thought, my feeling, and then absolutely another excellent technique is to do exactly what Janie just said, and take one side of a page and write down a thought that you're having. And then the other side of the page, who said that? And then even talk back to that. Why do I believe that? What does it matter? And just keep going and going. You might take one thought and have 40 lines of dialogue with yourself and disputation until you get to the point where you can say, that isn't true at all. I can let that go. Am I explaining that in a clear way, Janie? You're muted.
No, absolutely, Kathy. That was perfect.
Oh, okay, good. Because that's a very, very important piece, that not just to recognize it or write it
Right.
down, but to begin disputing it. Because again, these all require so many little steps. I mean, that's why we do it every year over and over and over, because we can't jump from A to B to Z, maybe in a lifetime, but we can certainly make progress. And none of us is going to get to perfection. It doesn't exist in people, but we can make progress. And that is what I was saying to Barbie earlier on too, that it's very helpful if we do write it down, because then we can track our progress. And I mean, it might be 6 years from now that you're saying, oh, I really used to think like that. I didn't realize that. And I'm so glad that I think differently now. And then another process that I've observed in myself and others have confirmed when I've talked with them, we don't go to new issues every year. I mean, maybe you do. Most people I know don't. We're kind of on that spiral again. And I always think of the Guggenheim Museum. We're seeing the same, if you look over the side, you may be seeing the same lobby, but you're seeing it from a different perspective and a different vantage point, and maybe even a broader vantage point. And that's how I have experienced working with myself and working with other people. You're not going to be working on some new foreign problem this year or next year. It's going to be that same old whatever that is showing up in different ways, but you can pat yourself on the back and say, oh, okay, there it is again. But this year, I dealt with it this way. Maybe I didn't deal with it how I hope to deal with it at some point in the future, but I made progress, and progress builds on progress. And I can keep moving, even though it's the same issue again and again. It will find a different place in my brain and in my integral body and spirit. Comments, questions?
Isn't it also, did I unmute?
Yeah, we hear you.
Isn't there also the side that is indisputable? that I did do that, or I did say that? And how do I, accept that I did that, and maybe express remorse or whatever,
Absolutely. I
And then-
mean, if you are aware, again, bringing to our awareness is so crucial. And yes, I mean, in Judaism, we have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we examine our behaviors and say, oh, yeah, I did that. What am I going to do about it now? And stages of apologies. I would direct people to Maimonides, who said a true apology, if I can off the top of my head get it right, has 4 levels. You have to identify it and acknowledge it. You have to say to yourself, I did that. And then you can express remorse to the other person. And then even after expressing remorse, that's not enough. You need to say, I recognize it, I did it, I'm sorry I did it, I'm never going to do it again. And then the 4th that he kind of throws in there is you move away. Now, if you talk about physically, okay, you move away, you go to a different town, whatever. Obviously, if you haven't done the inner work, you're going to take all that with you. But I can also say moving away from something can be spiritually moving away from it. I am a different person. I no longer do that. I've moved away from that being who did that action. And just also, and I invite other people to comment on what Chris said too, but I'll make one more comment that it's good to acknowledge what we've done is right. What have we done that is right? And we'll talk about this later on when we talk about what are we taking out of Egypt and what are we leaving there? Because some of our strengths and our abilities, we don't want to give them up. We want to keep those with us. So more to your point, Chris, yes, we acknowledge that we did something and we have to be self-reflective and examine it and say, well, why did I do it? I did it because I didn't understand XYZ. And again, going back to Janie's process, well, why didn't I understand it? I didn't communicate well enough. I didn't read enough. I didn't discuss it correctly with the person. And so it's really, the journaling is really a way of getting to know yourself, and it's only for you. I might ask questions and ask people to share things, but as I said last week, you don't have to share a single thing. The whole point of this is your inner journey. And I'd love to hear people's thoughts and invite you to say as much as you're willing to say, but it's for you. It's not for me, for you. To quote one phrase out of the Haggadah, but I won't finish it with, had I been there, I wouldn't have been redeemed because I'm there. Anyone else? Okay.
I'm not really a journaler, but after I was divorced many years ago, and in the process of it, I filled legal pads. I probably filled a dozen legal pads with just anything that came into my mind. I mean, I just,
Good.
and then several years later, I burned them because I didn't want anybody else to see all that pain. There was no point in that. And I just wanted to be done with it. And so it was very cathartic. It was, the writing.
The morning prior to the Seder, Chris, I don't know if you do this or not with Ken, but we physically burn the last of our Hametz. For that very reason too. Yes, spiritually, we're burning it. It's reminiscent of a sacrifice. But to me, it's also, it's gone. We're releasing it. We're letting it go. It serves no further purpose in our lives. And even in a secular way of burning journals, and I have done that too, it's very freeing to say, I've read it, I've reread it, I've gone over it and over it. It's time to let it go. Mhm. Another point I would add, though, for anyone who lives with other people in their homes, it's good to know that you can write whatever you want and have no fear of it being read by anyone else, because it's supposed to be totally private. So if you have any concerns about that, I used to suggest to people that they get a locked briefcase and put their journals in there and lock it. And I mean, hopefully whoever you live with, you're at a level of trust where if you say, I don't want you reading this, they're not going to read it. But certainly with the people I would work with and many people today, I mean, you can't guarantee that. And if it just gives you more the ability to really write your heart out and what you're really thinking, then put it in a locked briefcase where you know this is for you only. Okay, so how about turn to page 23 of the book I wrote, pathway number 2, mental. And let's just see if we've covered. Will somebody read that? No, we all can.
I'm up. I'm ready.
Okay, thank you. Me.
Some of our mental processes include memory, the formulation of new ideas, thought patterns, and imagination. What are our thought patterns? Everyone talks to themselves. We need to tune into what it is we are saying to ourselves. Our thoughts influence all aspects of our health and freedom. Pay attention to what you're telling yourself. Are you kind and nurturing as you would be to a young child? Or, like many of us, are you negative, harsh, and critical? Are you unforgiving of your own past behaviors? Using worksheet number 2, how much of this shall I read, Kathy? Shall I
Keep going.
Okay.
And worksheet,
Take a moment
worksheet
to.
number 2 is, I referred to it before, it's on page 57, and it doesn't go as far as disputing thoughts, but it does help you identify a very important link that comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'm sure I've said before, that an event happens and that event can be a thought. It doesn't mean something outside ourselves happens. An event happens and we have a thought about that event, which we may not be used to tuning into. Many of us think an event happens and that made me angry. When in reality, an event happens, we have a thought about that event, and it is our thinking that triggers what we feel. We don't go from event to feeling. We go event, thought in our own heads to what it means to us personally, and then it becomes a feeling within ourselves. So the purpose for that worksheet on emotional and mental work is helping you to identify that intermediary step. So-and-so said something to me. I'm so angry. Well, I remember using the example with a woman who was being very verbally abused by her husband, and she was telling me what he was saying to her and how it was so upsetting to her. And I said to her, but if he said to you, I hate your blue hair, what would that do to you? And she said, nothing, I don't have blue hair. And I said, exactly. He might say the same cruel, abusive remark, but if it doesn't resonate or trigger something within you, it's not going to upset you. So we need to get to the point where we know ourselves and we think kindly about ourselves enough to say, well, that's his opinion, it's not mine, or however we want to dispute that. But the important point being that the event triggers a thought that then leads to a feeling. Okay, Eli. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Just another way of stating that, which I've heard before, is that nobody can make you feel bad without your permission.
Right. Right. and there again, we come back to freedom and choice. We have a choice how we're going to feel, how we're going to respond. We are not slaves. Yes, Barbara.
At the same time, that being said, there's certain situations where it's absolutely appropriate, I think, to let yourself feel the anger that someone is evoking in you, if what there's, depending on, it has to do with
Oh,
relationship.
absolutely. I'm not saying don't feel it. That's a whole other thing. We absolutely have to feel the feeling, but recognize where it's coming from. I mean, when you recognize where it's coming from, you might be saying that person's a real a-hole.
Yeah.
And, or that person's someone I love very dearly. And when they say that, it really evokes a lot of anger in me. And your feelings are always justified. But I would say go deeper into looking at it and say, what is it about that statement that's making you so angry? Is it that it's true? Is it that it's totally false and the person doesn't understand you at all? And both are valid.
In either case, you need to deal with that aspect of it. And you can't, obviously you can't, if you zero in on the end product, which is your anger, you can't deal with the trigger. And what you really need to deal with is the trigger, even though your anger, if that allows you to get to that point of knowing why you're angry, then you can deal with that aspect, which is what you have to deal with ultimately.
I think we're saying the same thing, that you do, yes, absolutely need to recognize the feeling, name it. When we discuss the emotional pathway, we'll talk more about that, but that all feelings are valid and you need to recognize them. They're valid in that you're feeling it. In a cognitive perspective, or from a cognitive and mental perspective, I think that you need to delve into, well, why is it I'm feeling that? Is it valid? Is it something that triggered an old belief? Is it that the person is not a kind person? And as we look at relationships, is that someone I don't even want in my life if this is the way they're going to talk to me or behave towards me? But I agree, the feeling, of course, is valid, and I'm just saying it needs further exploration.
Right.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, Eli, maybe just continue to the bottom of that page.
Take a moment to write down some of your disturbing thoughts. You catch yourself saying negative statements to yourself. Perhaps your mind tells you you can't do that, or who do you think you are? Or you may be dwelling on past hurts and insults, unable to let them go. This is a mental form of enslavement that we are continuing, perhaps automatically. If you pay attention to your thoughts, you may find you are a harsh taskmaster. But those masters were in Egypt. It is time to leave them there. When we can wash ourselves clean of the debris that clutters our minds and our memories, then we can relive the experience of our people. We can return to the desert and begin the journey home again.
Thank you. So I also thank you again, Janie, because I just made a note about refuting statements, which I realize needs to be added into the next edition or workbooks or whatever, that it isn't enough just to recognize it. We need to learn to talk back to it or to acknowledge it and say, well, this is perfectly valid feeling. And I'm going to keep this feeling because I need to express it to whoever said it or behaved in a certain way that triggered my reaction. But again, as I just said, we'll get more into that next week when we talk about the emotional and behavioral pathways. So I'm going to go over just a little bit more of physical exercise, because I just think after sitting, and we've been sitting here an hour now, after sitting, that it is helpful to get up and stretch. So if you care to join me, do. If you want to stay seated, that's fine too. Your choice. Everything is about choice here. And yeah, just do some stretching and shaking out and movement and breathing. Even if you're still sitting down and you want to stay sitting, stretch in your chair, twist from side to side slowly. Move slowly and stretch stuff out, bend down, shake it out. Let go of any feelings in your body that may have been triggered just even by this session or this discussion. My goal is always to have people feel better after we've worked together. There'd be not much point in saying, God, I felt awful after that. So whatever you need to do to feel better, and certainly everyone has my email address, my phone number. Feel free to call me or say, boy, I really disagreed with you on this, that, or the other. I'm going to stay standing, so because that's what this exercise is, but do whatever makes you comfortable, and whatever I'm about to show you, you can do from a seated position as well. So once again, like we did last week, just allow yourself to take some nice, gentle breaths.
Mhm.
You can allow your eyes to close if you want, just trying to create a nice feeling of relaxation and whatever comfort you can get to in your body, breathing in. And as you breathe in, remember, when you breathe in, and actually this is ideal to do outside, but when you breathe in, you're bringing in the energy from the universe. And I particularly like to think of trees, because the trees give off oxygen for us to breathe. And when we breathe out back to them, we give back carbon dioxide so that they can live. And it's a very mutual beneficial relationship that we have with plants and grasses and trees and our earth, our universe. And I've seen two things on the internet recently. One, I'd have to find the link and I'll try and send it to you. One is a vision of the planet from outer space somewhere. And it shows the planets in constant motion with the seas and the winds and the atmosphere. And it's so phenomenal to me to realize that perspective versus the one we're used to on a daily basis. And then just the other day, I saw a moving picture from on top of the canopies of trees, and the trees are moving in harmony with each other and swaying, and it just brought such an amazing different perspective to me. So I would invite you, if I can find those links, I'll put them up or send them to you, because they were fascinating to me. But the second part of this physical exercise has to do with boundaries. And so if you stretch out your hands and then put your palms up and define your space. This is your space and your boundary and your protection. And then actually go in a full circle. Because it's not just the space in front of you, it's the space all around you. That is your protection. Now you can do this and see these boundaries however you want. I've known people who, and this has to do with just self-care and taking care of yourself. And as you identify your good, kind thoughts, keeping your thoughts that are good and not allowing other people to pierce that. So some people like to have armor. And whatever works for you is fine. Some people like to have light. My preference is, if I don't know if everybody's old enough, but do you remember those tubes with the gloppy stuff that we used to blow a big bubble?
Oh, yeah.
I know my sister does.
Yes.
And we used to blow a big bubble. So that's the type of boundary I like to have around me, because not only that, but I like to then see it as semi-permeable, because I like to say, and again, cognitive behavioral thinking while I'm doing this, that I welcome everything good and nourishing. I welcome all kindness from other people, but that negativity and unkindness has no place in my life anymore. Maybe it did at one time, but I don't allow it in anymore. And I'm surrounded by healing light and by this wonderful semi-permeable fluid kind of bubble that moves where I move and goes where I go and allows all good to come in, but nothing that is hurtful. So that's one physical exercise that I would add. And it's not the type of thing that you do once and you're done with it. These exercises are good to do every day or several times a day. Another one that we can do is raise our hands and as we identify Hametz in ourselves, think of holding it and not hating it, not being angry at parts of ourselves that are no longer useful, but just holding it and then releasing it and throwing it out. Just as we throw out the physical Hametz, we let go of anything that we identify as personal spiritual Hametz. So if you do that, I'd be interested in how it works for you. I'd be interested, as I said, part of what I'm hoping for from our time together is to have some new ideas and clarify my thinking and do some editing. And I will appreciate your sharing that with me. So I'm going to take the next couple minutes just to say next week, we'll talk about pathways 3 and 4, emotional and behavioral pathways to freedom. And there'll probably be some overlap with relational. Well, they all overlap, but behavioral overlaps with our relations and they all overlap. But if you're willing, the physical exercises start on page 30, and you'll see them written out. And then mental clearing exercises, read whatever you want, do whatever you want with this book, it's yours. Burn this book, whatever you want. But try to do some of the worksheets. And I would be very interested in what your experience is with that. So if you go through, even on page 58, worksheet 3, we've just talked about physically, mentally, we're going to get into emotionally, but even physically and mentally. Write some cues down to yourself. How am I going to know that I'm feeling physically freer? How am I going to, what's going to be a signpost that says, oh, you know, my mental space is clearing up? If we don't spend time identifying it, we don't know when it happens. And a lot of times things happen and we gloss over them and we don't realize that we've actually made progress or that we're doing something that's very good for us. We tend to focus more on what's negative than on what's positive. It's easier to feel the negative than the positive. And then just one more comment on that in terms of how we talk to ourselves. As you are cleaning out your house in the next few weeks and getting rid of the physical Hametz, as you throw it out, tell yourself, you know, I'm releasing this. This no longer serves me. I am done with the Hametz in my life. And whatever statements that you find, and if you care to jot them down or share them with us, that would be really nice. But begin to link for yourself the physical act with the mental. Okay? Any final words from anyone?
I'm glad Josh is recording this because I missed a good half of the program.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That was terribly important and I had to take that call. So I will hear the rest of it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You.
Kathy.
Thanks. I'm glad you were able to be here, Barbie.
Kathy,
Yes.
even with Dr. Burke, I like to hear a lecture once, twice, 3 times so it can sink in.
Mm-hmm.
When will these be available to re-see?
The first video is actually posted to the website now. I just put the link in the chat box, so you can feel free to copy and go over to that page at your convenience. This installation will be uploaded to that page probably within the hour.
Oh, wow. Well, as long as you're on, Josh, I'm going to ask you another question.
Sure.
I went to Barry's funeral at 11:29 and all I saw was the coffin. So I thought, oh, they're running a little late.
Okay,
And
sorry.
it turns out something was locked and I didn't actually get into the service until about 20 minutes later.
Oh.
Has that been recorded? I
I'm
would
not
have
sure.
loved to have heard what his family said.
I think that was organized through Levine Memorial
Right.
Chapel, but I
Okay.
can find that out for you. I'll speak to you soon
Oh, I can ask them.
Sure.
I'll ask. You don't have to. Thank you.
if you want to give them a call. Okay.
Anyone else have a comment or question before we close?
How's the puppy?
She's good.
Is that your puppy barking?
Huh?
Is that your puppy barking?
No, Carl's been quite kind in taking charge of her. And
Mine.
Aha!
That's why I
Yeah.
mute most of the time.
No,
with
no, he's been on strict orders to keep her quiet, and she loves her crate, and she goes in her crate when we want her in there. So she's doing very well, thank you. And I thank everybody for being here. Thank you again, Josh, for your expertise. It's very, very appreciated, and to Rabbi Spitzer for giving us space and time to be together. Have a
Thank
good
you.
week. Have a good week. I look
to see
forward to
everybody.
seeing everyone next week, if not
Next week.
before.
Bye-bye.
Good.
Thank you,
Love
Kathy.
you.
Yeah.
Bye for now.